What is the weirdest incident that happened at your high school while you were there? My principal thought my friends sacrificed a goat to the devil in the attic of the school and demanded that I confirm the rumor. I went to a small, private Christian school where we had to attend chapel once a week. The chapel service was led by a group of students called the Chapel Leadership Group. They had a lot of special privileges that many of them took advantage of. While the rest of us had to wear uniforms with itchy polo shirts, the chapel leadership group got to wear special t-shirts that were only supposed to be for chapel days, but they wore them all week without getting dress-coded. They also didn't have to take Bible class like the rest of us, and would boast about how they'd sit in the chapel unsupervised, sleep through the class, and get an easy A. There were other perks, but those were the ones I remember the most. As a form of rebellion, my friends decided to nickname themselves after the 7 deadly sins: gluttony, wrath, sloth, envy, lust, greed, and pride. I thought it was hilarious, but I didn't really get involved. A few weeks later, I was called to the principal's office. At the time, I was tutoring students during my free period, so I assumed the principal wanted to talk about that. But I was wrong. When I entered her office, she shut the door behind me, sat down, and gave me this intense, serious stare. She asked, "Redmare, did your friends sacrifice a goat to the devil in the attic over the church?" Cue comedic record scratch sound. My first thought was that she had to be joking. But no, she was completely serious. I told her no, that my friends wouldn't even know where to get a goat, let alone drag it through the school and up the narrow stairs to the locked attic. And wouldn't there be some evidence of a sacrifice? Blood or something? She didn't seem satisfied with my answer and proceeded to question everyone in the 7 deadly sins group. Of course, none of us had sacrificed a goat, and there was no evidence to back up the rumor. In the end, nothing came of it, except for us getting to tell the story of the time our principal accused us of sacrificing a goat in the attic. This same principal once told my class that we would all be mauled by bears if we didn't show more respect, because that happened in the Bible. It was interesting. Story 2. During my spare block after lunch, I was heading to my locker to grab a Pop-Tart when I noticed a girl from another high school in the hallway. She used to go to our school but got expelled for showing up to class drunk. Curious, I walked over to say hi, but before I could get a word out, she ran at me and gave me a massive bear hug. As she hugged me, I caught the unmistakable smell of whiskey on her breath. When she let go, I asked what she was doing there. She told me she was looking for a substitute teacher, let's call him Mr. Williams. She had heard he'd be teaching at our school that day and said she needed to talk to him. Since I had nothing better to do during my spare, I decided to help her find him. I didn't ask why she needed to see him, something I would soon regret. We went from classroom to classroom, searching for Mr. Williams. After checking 7 or 8 rooms, we finally found him. The moment she walked into the classroom, the look on his face said it all. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. I've never seen someone so utterly terrified. She stumbled into the middle of the classroom, and, in her drunken state, blurted out that she was pregnant, and that Mr. Williams was the father. What followed was a chaotic rant. She started yelling at him for ignoring her calls and texts since the last time they'd slept together at his place. She demanded to know why he hadn't responded, but Mr. Williams was frozen in shock, unable to form a coherent response. Then she started crying, asking if he was avoiding her because he didn't find her attractive anymore. Before anyone could process what was happening, she took off her shirt, threw it at him, then removed her inners and hurled it as well. She screamed, "How can you not want this body? I'm the sexiest woman you'll ever bang." At that point, I decided I wanted no part of whatever was about to go down. I turned and walked out, not wanting to be around when the principal or other teachers inevitably arrived to deal with the chaos. Story 3. The event itself took place before I became a student, but its legacy lived on through student rumors. I was lucky enough to have a teacher who had been on staff at the time and filled us in on the real story. I'm assuming he told us the truth. The rumor going around was that a teacher had been stealing students' lunches, sneaking into lockers to take food while everyone was in class, like some kind of bizarre lunch goblin. Anytime something went missing, people would blame this teacher, speculating that she was rummaging through their things. However, the real story was a bit different. Teachers were noticing small parts of their lunches were missing, just a slice of bread taken from their sandwich, a single bite out of a snack, and things rewrapped to make it look like nothing had been disturbed. The teachers thought it might be some kind of strange student prank, as it was only bits and pieces of food that were disappearing, and fingers were pointed at various people over the course of months. Then one day, the culprit was caught. One teacher found another teacher eating part of her lunch from the fridge. Understandably upset, and after dealing with this mysterious lunch theft for so long, she confronted the teacher, who responded by throwing a sandwich in her face and tackling her to the ground. The cops were called, and the teacher who had been stealing was put on medical leave. Later, she was let go after starting professional treatment. It turned out she had some serious personal issues that weren't being addressed, and those problems somehow manifested in her stealing food from her coworkers. The day it all came to a head was chaotic. They had to escort the teacher from the school and provide medical assistance to the one who had been tackled, and many students witnessed the whole ordeal. That's how the story became one of those lasting legends that everyone still talks about. Story 4. This was a huge deal at my high school, and it still is. I went to high school in Michigan, where winters can get brutal. During my senior year, we'd get ice days when it rained, then froze, making the roads unsafe. We had a few close calls where we should have had an ice day, but for some reason we still had school. After a bunch of near misses, we finally got a day off, but not because of an ice day. Some students decided to take matters into their own hands and slashed all the bus tires. Everyone was excited for the day off, but no one knew who had done it. For months, it remained a mystery. The cops came to the school and interviewed a few suspects, but nothing came of it. A couple of months later, some friends and I were sitting in class, joking about how great it would be if someone slashed the bus tires again. That's when a guy, let's call him Derek, caught our attention. He asked if we wanted him to do it again. At first, we were skeptical, but after Derek explained how he'd set up an alibi, we believed him. We weren't super close friends with Derek outside of school. He was quiet, slept through most of his classes, and spent his free time working out. But we agreed to give him $5 each to slash the tires again, and he agreed. The next day, no school. The bus tires were slashed again. Derek came through. The following day, the school was showing video surveillance footage of the bus yard on all the TVs. The police were trying to figure out who did it, but the footage was too blurry to make out any faces. All you could see were Derek and two other people, but only my friends and I knew who they were. The cops took Derek out of class for questioning, and about 30 minutes later, he came back with a huge grin on his face. He told us they had nothing on him, and they didn't. Derek completely got away with it. For the rest of the year, everyone at school wondered who the tire slasher was, and it turned into an urban legend. A couple of years later, my sisters went to the school, and I'd hear them talking about how maybe they'd get a day off if the bus slashers struck again. Even now, nearly a decade later, my little cousin, who goes to the school, tells me that people still talk about the bus slashers and how they could strike at any time. It's probably the biggest secret I've ever been a part of. It felt amazing knowing who did it when the whole school and community had no idea. And, to be honest, none of us ever actually gave Derek the $5 we promised him. He should have asked for it up front. Story 5. I went to a small public school in rural Australia, where we had the usual dramas, pregnancies, deaths, and chaos. But this one story always stands out as my favorite. There was this teacher we all absolutely hated, and we called him Voldemort, because he physically and personality-wise reminded us of the character. He wasn't a mass murderer or a racist, but he was a total jerk. Honestly, I can't even remember his real name. He was just Voldemort to everyone. He absolutely hated being called this and would give anyone who did automatic detention. Yep, even me. In the year below me, I was in year 8 at the time, so the year 7s, there was a girl named Chloe. She had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and was carrying a can of Coke to help manage her blood sugar. She was quiet, well-behaved, and had recently started dating the class bad boy, Otis, who's still a friend of mine. Anyway, Voldemort came up to Chloe in class and demanded to know why she was drinking something sugary during PE in the gym. She explained her condition and why she needed it, mentioning that all the teachers had been informed about her diabetes. Voldemort said he'd heard about it but didn't believe it, and took her Coke away. Well, Otis didn't like that and asked him what the hell he was doing. This quickly escalated into a shouting match in front of the whole class, while Chloe was starting to feel unwell. According to Otis, the breaking point came when he told Voldemort to F himself and suggested he get a nose job. They were in the gym doing hockey that day, and Voldemort started chasing Otis, a 13-year-old, around the gym with a hockey stick, trying to hit him. This was all happening in front of the entire class, and of course, with phones just becoming a thing, every student was filming it on their flip phones. In the chaos, Chloe fainted. The commotion caught the attention of the principal, who walked in to find a teacher chasing a student with a hockey stick while another student was unconscious. Needless to say, Voldemort was fired that same day. All the phones were confiscated so the footage could be deleted, but Chloe was fine in the end. Otis became a legend for finally exposing Voldemort for the complete jerk he truly was. Story 6. In my senior year, two friends of mine decided their prank would consist of them sitting on the floor in the lunch area, playing an intense game of chess, their use of words, not mine. Anywho, they managed to coerce roughly 85 other students to ring around them and start yelling out things like, "Holy crap, go get him. Yeah, beat his butt, oh crap. That's brutal," etc. to make the administration think they were fighting. Within a minute, it was over 250 kids all chanting. The admins ended up calling the cops to campus thinking a huge fight was breaking out. Guys sat there playing chess the entire time. The weird thing is that the police didn't let them finish the frigging game. Story 7. One morning, there was a bomb threat at my school before I arrived. However, instead of finding the doors locked or anyone there to redirect students, I managed to get inside the building. It struck me as odd that nobody was in class at 9 a.m., but I assumed everyone was attending a meeting in the gym that I had missed. So, I just decided to sit in my classroom and wait. When people eventually started returning to the building, the teachers were stunned to see me there. They had no idea how I had managed to get inside. For context, I arrived at school around 7:45 a.m. and didn't see anyone. No staff, no students, not even someone in the main office. My school had strict rules against interrupting gym meetings or being in the building at unauthorized times, and I didn't want to risk getting suspended. So, I figured staying put and waiting was the safest option. It was also early, and I was tired, so I wasn't really thinking much about it. Unfortunately, the automated call to inform families about the situation never reached my parents or me, so I had no idea the school was supposed to be closed until it was cleared. Story 8. There was a group of students at my school who managed to hack into teachers' computers and subtly change their grades over time. They'd tweak assignments or test scores by just a few points, so it wouldn't be obvious right away, but it added up. One of my favorite teachers was hit pretty hard by them. They managed to get a bunch of her passwords for various accounts, which was really upsetting. It turns out the ringleader of the group wasn't just into hacking, he was also stealing iPhones. When the cops raided his house, they found about 50 stolen phones in his room, along with some drugs. Story 9. When I was a freshman, a group of seniors pulled off one of the most elaborate pranks in our school's history. They convinced the entire student body that Fall Out Boy was coming to perform a concert for us. It all started with fake posters promoting a contest where Fall Out Boy would perform at the high school with the highest percentage of students signing a petition. Since our school only had about 500 students, they made it seem like we actually stood a chance. For about a week, they hyped it up and passed around a petition for everyone to sign. Then it went quiet for a while. Months later, rumors started spreading that we had won. There was no official announcement, just persistent whispers that kept gaining traction. Eventually, almost everyone believed it. Then one day, a black Escalade pulled up to the school during the middle of the day, visible from classroom windows. A few guys rushed into the theater with instrument cases, and students who saw them swore they were members of Fall Out Boy setting up for the big concert. Finally, the big day arrived. That morning, the principal made an announcement, telling us there was a huge surprise planned for the entire student body that afternoon and we were all to report to the theater during the last period. The excitement was through the roof, especially among the freshman girls, who spent the day squealing about how they couldn't believe Fall Out Boy was actually here. When we packed into the auditorium, the principal came on stage and confirmed it. Fall Out Boy was here to perform for us. He told us to give them a big welcome so they'd start playing. The whole auditorium erupted into chants of Fall Out Boys. As we chanted, the opening chords of Sugar, We're Going Down rang out over the speakers, and the stage curtain lifted. But instead of Fall Out Boy, it was a group of seniors in skinny jeans and tight pants rocking out to Fall Out Boy covers. They were the masterminds behind the entire prank. The funniest part? Many students didn't even realize it was a joke and stayed convinced they were seeing the real band halfway through the performance. Even though I had my doubts all year, the energy in the auditorium that day had me fully believing it by the time we were chanting. Somewhere, there's a video documenting the whole thing, but it's been tough to track down. Story 10. One night, a kid tripping on mushrooms ran through the school completely naked. Somehow, he ended up in the boys' locker room, which, at the time, was full of girls because the school was hosting a swim meet. Later, he explained that he thought he had died and assumed no one could see him because he believed he was a ghost. The real question is, though, if you thought you were dead and invisible, why would your first move be to head into the boys' locker room? Story 11. A couple of wild stories from school. One time, a kid was looking to fight someone during lunch, and somehow managed to attract a crowd of 200 to 300 students trailing behind him as he searched. Turns out, The kid he wanted to fight wasn't even at school that day. But because the crowd got so massive, he ended up being charged with inciting a riot. Then, during junior year, 6 fights broke out at the exact same time. In the chaos, a random bystander, who, for reasons unknown, was carrying a full gallon of milk around, decided to chuck it as high and far as possible down the hallway. The jug exploded on impact, drenching an unlucky freshman girl's face in milk. Story 12. The best story I can think of is the infamous Amber incident. One day, a bee flew into our classroom and Amber, who was allergic to bees, freaked out. She jumped up, screamed, "I'm allergic, I'll die," and bolted into the corner of the room. Enter the hero of this tale, a boy known as Raptor Boy. His nickname came from the fact that he spent most of his days pretending to be a raptor dinosaur, complete with growling, screeching, and clawing at the air. Seeing the distressed Amber, he leapt into action, yelling, "Don't worry, I got this." He swatted the slow-moving bumblebee out of the air like a pro. At this point, everything seemed fine. Amber ran out of the room, the teacher called for calm, and it looked like the chaos had been handled. But then, for absolutely no reason, Raptor Boy bent down, picked up the half-dead bee, and ate it. The entire class froze as he chewed on the poor bee for a solid 30 seconds before calmly sitting back down at his desk. Everyone, including the teacher, just stared in stunned silence. After a long pause, the teacher finally tried to move on. "All right then, let's contin," but she never finished her sentence because Raptor Boy suddenly let out a loud roar, jumped up, and bolted out of the classroom, making dinosaur noises and hopping like a maniac. He slammed the door behind him as he left. The teacher, still in shock, muttered, "I should probably go check on him, he might have been stung or..." Just then, Raptor Boy burst back into the room, still roaring, swiped at a few students for dramatic effect, grabbed his backpack, and ran out again. We all sat there in stunned silence until, a minute later, the fire alarm went off. Without missing a beat, the teacher stood up and said, "All right, everyone. Dinosaur outbreak. Head to the exits." Story 13. We had a bomb threat at 1 p.m., out of the blue. We had to evacuate and the plan was to walk across the street to the middle school and fit the entire school into the auditorium. I was fully expecting to die that day because that apparently was the published plan if there was a bomb threat, and a truly intelligent terrorist would place the bomb in the auditorium and just kill all of us, right? Because that's smart. Well, after that there wasn't much of a plan. Police were called, they had to search the school and the principal just had teachers spread the word verbally that we were just to find a ride home. No buses. Nothing. Parents weren't too pleased with that. It turned out to be a kid not wanting to take a test the next day. Story 14. Well, it's been over 10 years since I've been, but one of the most unusual things I ever witnessed was during my junior year. My best friend dated the son of a para, so we got to know his mom very well since the child she worked with was at our school and in our grade, some of our classes. I forgot my anatomy book and left 15 minutes in class to get it. On my way to my locker, I see her and the autistic child, whom we've known for several years, at his locker a little further down the hall. Mind you, the halls were basically empty and he was spinning around. I thought this was just something common with people who have severe autism, but it turns out he was urinating while spinning. She was doing all she could to stay out of the line of fire, all the while trying to tell him to stop without gaining any attention. I sprinted to the bathroom and grabbed as much paper towel as I could, and both of us furiously tried to clean up the mess so there wouldn't be more social stigma towards him than there already was. No one ever knew, but to this day, I've yet to see something more surreal than a human water sprinkler. Story 15. My school was setting up one of those wrecked cars on the school ground to show what texting and driving did. I was in the last class of the day and it was on the ground floor of school. They pulled up with the car on the wrecker and started lowering it into place. A kid who was in that class with me got up, walked to the window, and just stood there watching. The teacher asked him to sit down a couple of times. Another student walked up to him, whispered something, and sat back down. The teacher then went on teaching class. When the wrecker was done and drove away, the kid opened the window and climbed out. At this point we all got up to watch him. The teacher just gave up his class, was almost over anyhow. The kid walked to the car and tried to open the driver's side door, but it wouldn't open. So he climbed into the passenger side and scooted to the driver's side and just sat there. The girl that had spoke to the teacher before told everyone that the car that the school had put out there was his sister's. His sister had died about 2 weeks earlier when she was T-boned by accidentally pulling out in front of someone. She was a student at the school. I felt so damn bad for this kid. About a week later he asked me for a ride home. When I dropped him off he told me, "Be careful pulling out onto highway his sister died on." It's dangerous. I still think it is seriously messed up that the school put that car there. Edit, it was not texting and driving as I graduated in 2005 and that wasn't even a thing then. I'm not sure why the school put the car there, they didn't put any signs on it or anything. I think they just wanted us to see a wrecked car that one of our classmates had died in so we would take driving more seriously. The car wasn't there very long as many parents complained. Story 16. Our chess club met every lunch in the history classrooms, which had large glass windows overlooking the football oval. One day, a particular chess match got intense. One boy accused his opponent of cheating, and things quickly escalated. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and then the accuser completely lost it. He grabbed his opponent, lifted him out of his chair, and threw him, not out but through, the classroom window. Glass shattered everywhere, blood was splattered on the bricks outside, and paramedics were called to the scene. It was utter chaos. Moral of the story? Chess is serious business. Another story. During our Year 11 leadership camp, a weekend retreat, where we were supposed to learn how to become responsible adults and prepare for Year 12 leadership roles, 2 of my classmates decided to sneak out of their cabins at night. Instead of bonding or stargazing like normal people, they found a kangaroo in the nearby bushland and attacked it, breaking its leg with a rock. The rangers had to be called to euthanize the poor animal. That's leadership for you. Story 17. A girl in her final year of school, who was 18 at the time, got pregnant and managed to hide it from her parents. Struggling with the situation, she sought help from the school counselor, who was a qualified clinical psychologist. The counselor provided her with support, walked her through all her options, and followed protocol to help her make an informed decision. Despite this, the girl, possibly in denial, continued with the pregnancy while also reportedly starving herself. Later on, she decided she didn't want to go through with it. From what I remember, though the details are a bit hazy, she ended up going to a dodgy clinic where she lied about how far along she was. The clinic, apparently not doing proper tests, gave her abortion pills. The next day, while in class, she began bleeding heavily and had to be rushed to the hospital. Tragically, the baby survived for about 4 hours before passing away. When her parents got involved and began asking questions, the girl claimed the school counselor had forced her to have an abortion. This led to a court case that turned into a major scandal. The school counselor, despite being innocent, wasn't allowed to publicly defend herself while the case was ongoing. 4 months, reporters camped outside our school gates, and the whole situation caused a lot of stress and confusion. Eventually, it came out in court that the girl had lied. The counselor had done everything by the book, provided appropriate advice, and had never coerced the girl in any way. Despite the ordeal, the counselor remained professional throughout, respecting confidentiality and refusing to speak out until the case was resolved. It was an absolutely insane situation, but I was impressed by how the counselor handled it with such grace and professionalism. Story 18. This happened just yesterday, and it was a pretty wild incident for a Canadian school. At the end of the day, there was a police car parked in front of the school. Someone mentioned seeing a kid getting arrested when they went to the washroom. By dismissal time, a cop and the principal were standing by the back passenger windows of the police car, talking to someone inside. Naturally, we all assumed it was about someone getting busted for selling drugs or something similar. The next day, during homeroom, our teacher filled us in on what actually happened. Turns out, between the 3rd and 4th periods, the afternoon classes in Canada, a former student, around 20 years old, had blended in with the current students and snuck into the school. Once inside, he wandered through the hallways, stealing from unlocked lockers and even managed to swipe about 10 laptops from teachers' classrooms. They eventually caught him at the Tim Hortons down the road. Rumor has it his mom was waiting a couple of blocks away in the getaway car, but he had to make a pit stop at Timmy's first. Only in Canada would someone stop for coffee and a donut in the middle of a robbery spree. Story 19. One time, a friend of mine brought this insane hot sauce called Da Bomb, 1.5 million Scoville units, way hotter than anything most people can handle, to school and let a bunch of kids try it during lunch. I'm talking at least 30 kids. Some of them really started freaking out because this stuff is ridiculously hot. You're supposed to add just 1 or 2 drops to a big pot of chili, not take a swig of it straight. A few kids tried to show off and ended up taking a big gulp, which made them puke everywhere from the heat and panic. Multiple kids had to go to the nurse and even get sent home because they seriously overdid it. I don't think most of them had any idea what a Scoville unit was or that hot sauces could be that intense. It was pure chaos. I tried a small dime-sized amount myself, and I couldn't think about anything except chugging milk. And I'm pretty good with spicy foods. Eventually, the principal came over the intercom and said, "Whoever brought the hot sauce, please, just stop." My friend ended up in some serious trouble for that one. Story 20. When I was a freshman in high school, we went into lockdown for an active shooter situation. There were cop cars swarming the building and helicopters flying overhead. It was a huge ordeal, and naturally, every student and teacher was scared. A rumor started circulating that the shooter was in the science hallway, which just so happened to be where I was at the time. With all the panic and rumors flying around, one science teacher decided to make a Molotov cocktail to throw at the potential shooter, while another teacher grabbed one of his golf clubs that he kept stashed away and broke it in half to use for self-defense. In the end, it turned out that the shooters were just people with paintball guns, and both of those teachers were fired the next day. It became a topic of discussion throughout the rest of my years at that school, with many people saying it was unfair to fire teachers who, in theory, were just trying to defend their students from a potential threat. Story 21. During senior year, we received our yearbooks the week of graduation, and to our surprise, the full-page action shot for men's soccer featured one of our players jumping to trap and control the ball. Unfortunately, he had forgotten to wear underwear that game, and the tip of his, was clearly visible sticking out from the bottom of his shorts. Our school had over 4,000 students, and we were all required to bring our yearbooks to security to have the image censored with a Sharpie, or we wouldn't be allowed to walk at graduation. Story 22. During my sophomore year of high school, my family and I went on spring break to a condo out of state. It was a great trip, and I definitely recommend Virginia to anyone looking for a scenic getaway. When we returned and I went back to school that Monday, everyone was staring at me like they had seen a ghost. I was an introvert in a public school of about 1,200 students, so it was pretty unnerving. I had girls and guys running up to me, hugging me, and saying how glad they were that I was okay, even people I didn't really talk to. I was totally confused. It turned out that while we were on spring break, a kid in the next town over had been struck by a car and killed. His name was almost identical to mine, except for one letter in his last name. So, when people saw the story, they assumed the name was misspelled because that letter was a common mistake with my name. I wouldn't call it the incident at my school, but that day was definitely unforgettable. Story 23. I was a teacher when a really good kid was pushed to his breaking point by a bully of a teacher. This teacher had been picking on him for years, but I never quite figured out what the deal was. One day, the bully teacher said something to the kid that was the last straw. The kid ran out to his car, grabbed a crowbar, and stormed back into the building, smashing every piece of glass he could find. It was safety glass, but there were still plenty of shards. He tried to go after the teacher, intending to hurt him. He was eventually cornered in the library, which was connected to my classroom, and I was right next door, keeping my students seated and making sure they couldn't leave for about 90 minutes. Meanwhile, police were showing up from all directions since the school was right off 2 state highways, state cops, K-9 units, you name it. The kid destroyed everything he could: oak shelving from the 1940s, the teacher's desk, anything that could break. Then, his mom arrived and managed to disarm him. The kid was put on a stretcher and taken to a nearby Air Force base, where his dad worked. I'm not entirely sure what happened after that, but he was given a lifetime ban from the school and a serious restraining order from the teacher he'd attacked. I'd always liked the kid and had never had any issues with him. A couple of months later, I ran into him and asked if he had ever been angry with me. He just laughed. It turned out he had been diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder. He went on to grow into a good adult. He just lost control that day. Story 24. Here's the story. In high school, I did the morning announcements with 2 other guys. Every Friday, we'd go on camera in front of a green screen and choose the background. This was the early 2000s, so technology was pretty simple and we had a lot of freedom. From the AV room, we controlled every TV in the school, which had over 1,000 students. As Christmas neared, we were told not to do anything holiday-related because not everyone celebrated Christmas. So, on the last announcement before the holidays, the screen comes on and in the background, there's a sleigh ride video. We pop up in Christmas costumes and yell Merry Christmas, as loud as we can. Now, the school couldn't turn off the broadcast, only we could. And of course, the superintendent was in the building that day, saw it, and freaked out. It turned into a huge ordeal, and we were almost suspended for 3 days. They stopped letting us do the announcements, but eventually, a petition was signed by the school to bring us back because, honestly, we were pretty funny. Most of the pranks we pulled were harmless, like eating a whole can of creamed corn in under 10 seconds if enough cans were donated to the food drive. When we were finally allowed to return, The rule was that we couldn't make jokes and had to use a neutral background. So, we had a new plan. The first announcement after our suspension, we had no background, just the green screen. We wore plain white t-shirts and read the announcements with zero enthusiasm, occasionally groaning or moaning. It started off subtle, but by the end, it sounded like we were making suggestive noises. We wrapped up the announcements, said goodbye, and then started acting like we didn't know the camera was still on. We stood up in our boxer shorts and walked off camera. A few seconds later, our friend Scott stood up from under the table, wiped his lips, took a big gulp, and casually walked off screen. This time, we were actually suspended. Story 25. When I was in high school, someone driving on the road beside us called the cops about a sniper being on grounds. We had a SWAT team swarming, police helicopters, breaking news on all 4 major networks in the city. Turned out to be a guy with a rake who was cleaning up the leaves. Edit. For everyone asking, this was not in Australia or DFW, it was in Oklahoma City. Story 26. I went to high school where a distant relative on my dad's side worked as a counselor. There was an unspoken rule in the family: you never left your kids alone with him. I can still remember my dad scolding me when I was younger for taking a candy bar from him at a family event. One day, I saw him getting too friendly with a friend of mine, and I warned my friend to stay away from him. I explained why, but soon enough, word spread that I was accusing the counselor of inappropriate behavior. As a result, I got an in-school suspension, and my parents were called in for a meeting. Once the counselor learned that my dad was coming, he suddenly had an emergency to handle. My dad, however, made it very clear to the principal that he wouldn't tolerate the counselor being anywhere near me. He said if he ever found out the school allowed him near me, he would take matters into his own hands. A lot of teachers took issue with me for speaking out and labeled me as spreading rumors. But things took a turn in my sophomore year when the counselor disappeared from school halfway through the year. My dad later told me he was arrested for inappropriate behavior at a theater during a children's movie. Authorities found disturbing material in his car and his home, including photos of students from the school. Ironically, none of the teachers who had criticized me for spreading rumors ever apologized, except for one, my English teacher. He was this towering figure, 6 feet 4 inches with a voice that could command the entire school, and he broke down in tears, telling me he could never forgive himself for not believing me. Story 27. In 10th grade Spanish class, everything suddenly changed when the teacher received a call at her desk in the back of the room. Immediately, the entire school was put on lockdown, and no one was allowed to leave the classroom. It turned out that a middle school student, who attended the same junior/senior high building, had brought what was suspected to be a pipe bomb to the nearby elementary school, which shared a parking lot with our school. The student went into the elementary school to ask if anyone there knew what the device was. He had placed it in the back of his truck and parked it right outside the entrance. It was later revealed that the student's family had significant intellectual disabilities. The bomb was actually just a small piece of PVC pipe with caps on both ends, containing no explosives. The student had brought it to the school because he thought it was the place where he could find people who could help him identify it. While his intentions were not harmful, it was still a poor decision that caused a lot of panic. Story 28. A really strange and unsettling story unfolded when a random Facebook account appeared, making threats to shoot up the school unless a particular girl confessed to something she allegedly did. No one knew who was behind the account, and the girl had no idea what she was supposed to admit to. The threats escalated, and the account started posting explicit pictures and videos that the girl had taken, censoring the nudity but implying intimate contact. In response, the school decided to send everyone home for Christmas break a few days early while the district figured out how to handle the situation. A town hall meeting was held, and during the meeting, a parent showed up with a gun, causing a lot of panic. The FBI got involved and arrests were made, but each suspect was released due to lack of evidence. The Facebook account continued to mock authorities, taunting them for not being able to catch the person behind the threats. At one point, my wife and I were at Red Robin when the account posted that the girl was at the mall across the street and that many people were about to be hurt. We watched as law enforcement converged on the mall, but the girl wasn't there, nor was anyone with weapons. Eventually, the account stopped posting with a message claiming that the person behind it was a guy in Minnesota who had randomly chosen a school, a girl, and a town to mess with. Months later, an arrest was finally made, and it turned out the person responsible was a man in California. But it took a long time to crack the case. Story 29. My school got a new vice principal during my senior year, and he was a condescending jerk who made a habit of sitting outside the girls' bathroom, interrogating us about why we needed to use it. Right before the winter break, he hijacked the morning announcements and began with, "Students, I have a very important message that has unfortunately become necessary, and I require your full and undivided attention." We all thought something serious had happened, like a major issue or safety concern. But no, what he actually talked about was gift wrap. Yep, you read that right. He lectured us about how lazy and entitled we were, saying gift cards were unacceptable gifts, and that using gift bags or tissue paper was lazy and insulting. According to him, the only acceptable way to wrap gifts was in paper with a hand-tied bow. The next day, some students had a little fun with his rules. They wrapped gifts for him, all in paper with hand-tied bows, just like he wanted. The first gift contained live crickets, the second was a glitter bomb, the third had laxative chocolates, and the fourth was filled with photos of people giving him the middle finger. There were more gifts, but he never opened them. Instead, he hijacked the morning announcements again and went off on a rant about how we were all garbage people from a garbage generation. He was eventually investigated for harassing female students outside the bathrooms, including me, and he was fired. Honestly, he was the worst VP I've ever had, and that's saying something, considering I had an elementary school principal who once told me I was overreacting when some of my bullies poisoned my food with things I'm intolerant to. Story 30. A theater kid named Roger started selling homemade sandwiches at school. They were delicious, affordable, and put the cafeteria food to shame. His business quickly took off, but it didn't sit well with the cafeteria ladies. They were upset and took the issue to the administration, which resulted in Roger being banned from selling his sandwiches. Determined to fight back, Roger did what any theater kid would do. He wrote a one-act play, casting the cafeteria ladies as the villains and creating an underdog hero to battle against them. The play turned out even better than his sandwiches and became a huge hit at school. Roger took it to the area competition and, as far as I know, even made it to the state one-act play contest. Meanwhile, he kept selling his sandwiches, but with a clever workaround. He set up an ordering system. You'd order the sandwich the day before and pick it up just off campus in the morning. Technically, it wasn't a school issue anymore. These days, Roger lives in LA and works as a production assistant. I like to think that the lunch ladies unknowingly fueled his career, providing him with the inspiration for his early success. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.